The metal deck of AB-29 over the Pacific. 6 in the morning, the 12th of April, 1945. A phosphorus marker has just misfired up through the launch chute and bounced back into the radio compartment, burning at 1300 degrees, and it is now rolling slowly toward the open hatch of the bomb bay, where 5 tons of incendiaries sit waiting for the target. A young staff sergeant from Bessemer, Alabama, kneels down through the smoke, half blind, his flight suit already on fire, and closes both hands around the shell. He has 6 seconds before the bombs below him cook off. He stands up and starts walking forward. Henry Eugene Erwin was born on the 8th of May, 1921, in Adamsville, Alabama, just north of Birmingham. His father, a coal miner, died when Henry was small. His mother raised 5 children alone, in a frame house on the edge of a mining town where the air smelled of coke ovens and the streetlights came on early because of the smoke. He grew up in Bessemer, 12 miles down the road. He was a quiet boy. He sang in the church choir at Mount Sinai. He took a job before he had finished school at the U.S. Steel Mill to help his mother keep the younger ones fed. He was 20 years old, working a Sunday shift at the mill, when somebody came down the line and told him that the Japanese had bombed a place in Hawaii called Pearl Harbor. He finished his shift. He walked home. He told his mother he was going to enlist. He waited 1.5 years. He waited because his mother asked him to wait, and because the family needed the wages from the mill. In February of 1943, he walked into the recruiting office in Birmingham and asked for the Army Air Forces. He wanted to be a pilot. He had never flown. He had never even been close to an aircraft. The Army gave him radio school instead. He trained at Scott Field, Illinois, and at Yuma, Arizona. He learned Morse code at 20 words a minute. He qualified as a gunner on a Boeing trainer. By the autumn of 1944, he was a staff sergeant assigned to a brand new aircraft most of America had still never heard of. It was called the B-29 Superfortress. It was pressurized. It flew at 30,000 feet. It carried 10 tons of bombs and 11 men, and it had been built for one mission, which was to fly across the Pacific from islands the Marines were still bleeding to take, and to burn down the cities of Japan. Erwin was assigned to the 52nd Bombardment Squadron of the 20th Air Force. His crew was given a brand new aircraft and named her the City of Los Angeles. They flew her across the Pacific in stages and arrived at North Field on Guam in February of 1945. He wrote his mother once a week. He told her about the chapel they had built out of crates. He did not tell her about the missions. The 20th Air Force, by that spring, was running fire raids on Japan that killed more people in a single night than any other bombing operation in the history of war. Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe. The crews flew low now at 5,000 feet, in the dark, dropping incendiaries. The losses were rising. The men did not talk about the losses. By the second week of April, Henry Erwin had flown 10 combat missions. On the 11th of April, his crew was briefed for an 11th. The target was Koriyama, on Honshu, a chemical plant complex north of Tokyo. The city of Los Angeles would fly lead. Her job, before the drop, was to release a white phosphorus marker out the bottom of the fuselage, to signal the formation behind her where to converge. The marker was a 30-pound smoke shell. Its safety lanyard was wired to the inside of the launch chute. When the shell fell, the lanyard pulled, the fuse armed, and 4.5 seconds later the phosphorus ignited. But the safety lanyard had not held. They left Guam in darkness. 12 B-29s of the 52nd, climbing on full throttle past the volcanic ridges, joining up over the open ocean at 2,500 feet. The city of Los Angeles held lead position. The aircraft commander was Captain George A. Simmerl. There were 11 men on board, plus a photographer writing for the strike record. Henry Erwin was at the radio operator station, just aft of the cockpit. In front of him was a small chute that ran down through the floor of the aircraft to the outside air. Through that chute, on signal from the bombardier, he would release the phosphorus marker. At about 5:45 in the morning, the bombardier called for it. Erwin pulled the pin. He dropped the canister into the chute. The chute had a design flaw nobody had yet identified. The shell, hitting the lip of the opening, struck the safety lanyard early. The fuse armed instantly. Instead of falling clear of the aircraft, the phosphorus ignited inside the chute, and the chute spat the burning shell back up, into the radio compartment, and into Henry Erwin's face. What he carried was burning at over 1,000 degrees. The white phosphorus stuck to his flight suit, to the skin of his face and his hands. It blinded him at once. The compartment filled with thick white smoke. Captain Simmerl, in the cockpit ahead, lost sight of the instruments. The aircraft began to descend, blind, in formation with 11 others, all heavily loaded with incendiaries, all flying at 2,500 feet over open water. The shell, still burning, rolled across the metal deck. It rolled toward the open hatch of the forward bomb bay, where the load was racked and ready. If it reached the bombs, the aircraft would not exist a second later. Henry Erwin, on fire, half-blind, on his knees, reached down with his bare hands and picked the shell up. He could not throw it out a window from the radio compartment. There was no window. The nearest opening to the outside air was the pilot's side window in the cockpit, 60 feet forward, through the navigator's compartment, past the flight engineer's station, past the aircraft commander's seat. He started walking. Nobody on board later was able to describe exactly what they saw. The navigator, Lieutenant Pruitt, was crouched over his table. Erwin came past him with the burning shell tucked against his ribs and asked him, in a level voice, to open the window. The navigator stared at him for a second and then yanked the chart table out of the way. Erwin kept walking. The phosphorus was eating through his flight suit. His hands had stopped feeling anything at all. He could not see the cockpit ahead of him. He was following the slope of the deck and the memory of where the seats were. He reached the flight deck. Captain Simmerl, half choking, turned around in his seat and saw a man on fire walking toward him out of the smoke, carrying something the color of a small white sun. Simmerl threw open his side window. Henry Erwin leaned across the pilot's lap and threw the shell out into the sky. Then he dropped to the deck of the aircraft. The smoke cleared in seconds. Simmerl pulled the aircraft out of its descent at 300 feet above the water. He looked down at the man on his cockpit floor and gave one order, which was to abandon the mission and to make for the nearest land that had a hospital. The nearest land was Iwo Jima, about 300 miles north. They flew at full power. The flight engineer beat out what was left of the fire on Erwin's body with a flight jacket. The co-pilot got morphine into him. The radio operator at the second set sent ahead to Iwo Jima that they had a man dying on board. When they landed, the medics climbed inside with a stretcher. They came back out and said, quietly, that they did not think the sergeant would live to reach the hospital tent. He did. He lived through the night. He lived through the transfer to a larger hospital on Guam, where a surgeon spent 6 hours picking phosphorus out of his face, his chest, and his hands. The phosphorus in water will reignite. They had to keep him submerged in tubs between operations. He was blind in his right eye. He had third-degree burns over most of his upper body. His right arm was contracted at the elbow and could not be straightened. He could not speak above a whisper. Nobody on board expected him to live the hour. He had lived 4 days. The crew of the city of Los Angeles, back at North Field, wrote a recommendation in longhand the night they landed. Captain Simmerl carried it to the wing commander. The wing commander forwarded it to General Curtis LeMay's headquarters with one sentence added at the bottom, which was that this should be acted on at once, because the sergeant was not expected to survive. On the 19th of April, 1945, 7 days after the mission, a Medal of Honor was flown out from Hawaii. There was no time to have one struck for him. Quartermasters took one out of a display case at the Army headquarters in Honolulu and put it on a transport plane. General LeMay flew personally to Erwin's bedside. He read the citation aloud in a quiet room with the shades drawn. He pinned the medal to the pillow next to Erwin's head, because there was no part of his uniform left to pin it to, and no part of his chest that could bear the weight. Henry Erwin, behind his bandages, said, "Thank you, sir." He was the only enlisted airman of the entire Second World War to receive the Medal of Honor while still alive. They flew him home on a hospital aircraft in May. He went through 43 operations over the next 30 months at the Army Hospital in Pratt, Kansas, and then at the VA in Birmingham. Surgeons rebuilt his right eyelid. They rebuilt his lower lip. They unhooked the contracted tendons in his right arm by hand, finger by finger, until he could open it again. He learned to write with his left. He was discharged from the army on the 8th of October, 1947. He went home to Bessemer. He married a woman named Betty Sanders, whom he had known since high school. They had 4 children. He took a job at the Birmingham VA, working as a benefits counselor. He sat across a wooden desk from men who came in with paperwork they could not read and with wounds they could not talk about. He listened to them when they could speak, and he sat with them when they could not. He did this for 37 years. He did not give interviews. He did not write a memoir. When a reporter would knock on his door, he would invite them in for coffee and turn the conversation gently to the man down the road who had lost a leg at the bulge. He would say that he had had luck and other men had not, and that it was not his story to dwell on. In 1997, the United States Air Force created an award named after him, the Henry E. Erwin Outstanding Enlisted Aircrew Member of the Year Award. He died on the 16th of January, 2002, at the age of 80. He is buried at Elmwood Cemetery, in Birmingham, under a low headstone that gives only his name, his rank, the dates, and the words Medal of Honor. There is a question that comes up every time you tell a story like this one, which is the question of why. Why does a 23-year-old radio operator from a steel mill town pick up a piece of metal that is burning at 1300 degrees and walk it 60 feet through a smoke-filled aircraft, when every instinct in the human body is built to drop it and run? The official answer is the citation. It speaks of conspicuous gallantry. It speaks correctly of the 11 other men on board who would have died in the next 4 seconds. The truer answer, the one Henry Erwin never gave, is probably simpler. He had 11 brothers on that aircraft. He had a window 60 feet forward. He had 2 hands. He picked it up the way a man picks up a child out of the road. And then, for the next 57 years, he refused to make any more of it than that. He went to work at the VA. He counted other men's wounds instead of his own. Henry Erwin lived another 57 years after the morning he should not have survived. He almost never spoke about those 6 seconds. He spent the rest of his life behind a small desk at the Birmingham VA, helping the next man through the door fill out his paperwork, listening when the man could speak and sitting with him when he could not. There are more like him every week on the Untold Front. Quiet men, quiet women, who did one impossible thing and then went home and refused to be a hero about it. Subscribe so the quiet ones are not lost.